Hersheypark is one of the best roller coaster parks in the entire country, boasting a lineup of 14 different coasters, including a world-class RMC, a supporting cast of multiple Intamin coasters, and 2 large-scale B&M installations. However, this park can be challenging to visit due to its very high attendance, odd layout, and the volume of quality roller coasters. In this video, we will give a breakdown of all of these coasters and a step-by-step guide to maximize your time at Hersheypark to get all of the coasters done in a single day and get multiple re-rides. The park's best coaster is Wildcat's Revenge, which is an RMC conversion of their former GCI coaster Wildcat. The original Wildcat was actually the first coaster ever built by Great Coasters International when it opened back in 1996, and the new conversion opened in 2023. So it is still basically a brand new coaster. The layout of Wildcat's Revenge is spectacular. It mixes traditional and sideways airtime with floaty and fast-paced inversions. It has a total of 4 inversions, including a step-up underflip, 2 0G rolls, and a 0G stall, in addition to almost a dozen airtime moments, which of course all launch you out of your seat. Wildcat's Revenge starts with a small pre-lift section out of the station, with a few elements that prepare you for what's to come. The train barrels into the lift hill with so much momentum that you can feel the chain sort of oscillating forwards and backwards as it dampens the motion of the train. As usual with RMC coasters, the anti-rollbacks on the hill are extremely loud, so you have to yell to talk to the person sitting next to you. Once you reach the crest, the train plummets down the 140-foot, 82-degree drop. This drop gives airtime in all rows, but it of course gives ejector airtime in the back car. It's essentially a standard RMC first drop, which is a very good thing. Then the train rises up into the step-up underflip, which is a 270-degree rising 0G roll, but the train then stays banked to the right as it drops back to the ground. It is a very fun element as you float through the roll and then fly back towards the ground. You then keep turning to the right and then encounter a traditional airtime hill. This is really the only traditional airtime hill on Wildcat's Revenge, and it delivers pure ejector airtime to riders in every single row of the train. Then the train banks slightly to the right and then left into a wave turn which delivers ejector airtime to all rows. This is followed by a 0G stall. The stall isn't the best I've seen on an RMC, but it's still a good element with lots of hang time. After this, you bank to the right into another wave turn, and this one is even stronger than the first, giving more ridiculously strong sideways ejector airtime. Then you head up into the double down. This element basically consists of an airtime hill to get you out of your seat, then a sharp unbanked turn to the left to deliver some laterals while you're still getting airtime. Finally, the train dives down once again to deliver another dose of airtime. This whole element basically just pins you up against your lap bar and to the right side of your car. Some people think this element is too much, but I absolutely loved it. Then you head into a 0G roll, a left-hand turn, and then another 0G roll. These feel basically identical to me, but they are both strong elements which really whip you through them. The last 2 elements on Wildcat's Revenge are a small traditional airtime hill and then an off-axis hill into the brakes. These are the only elements on this coaster I would say are too intense. The airtime is so sharp here that it hurt my thighs and shins quite a bit. But it's only 2 elements, so I can look past it. Overall, the biggest word I used to describe this coaster is power. Every element is powerful, whether that's with airtime or laterals. That's also what I think makes this coaster so great. There are so many different elements that could be considered the best on the ride. The 2 wave turns, any of the inversions, the double down, the large camelback, or even the small off-axis hill at the end of the ride. For me, this is easily the best coaster in the park. My second favorite coaster here is Skyrush, which is an Intamin mega coaster with wing seats installed in 2012, and it stands at a height of 208 feet. This coaster just specializes in intensity. It has ridiculously strong airtime, which has been speculated to reach a G-force of -2 on the second airtime hill. In addition, it supposedly reaches a positive G-force of 5. Regardless of the exact numbers, it is easy to make a case for Skyrush being one of the most intense coasters in the entire world. You start off by flying up the 200-foot lift hill right out of the station. This coaster has a cable lift, sort of like Millennium Force at Cedar Point or El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure, but it is even faster than both of those. I believe it is the second quickest lift hill of any coaster in the world. Then you fly down the demented first drop that gives ejector airtime in all rows, and in the back row it is one of the craziest first drops in the world. You rise out of your seat for the first half of the drop, but halfway down, the train finally reaches its max angle, meaning the shaping of the track absolutely throws you into your restraint. I've never felt anything like it on any other first drops that I've been on. The following layout consists of 3 insane ejector airtime hills, intense turns which glue you to the back of your seat, and some snappy elements which I would most closely compare to the Stangle dives on Maverick at Cedar Point, which give strong laterals and a little airtime as well. But the reason this layout is so compact and unique is because of the footprint it is in. Intamin did not have very much room to work with and also had to weave around other coasters, most especially Comet. This plot of land runs over a lake and is about the same size as the plot of Wildcat's Revenge, which is crazy considering it is over 60 feet taller, has a max speed that is 13 miles per hour faster, and still has more track length. It is a short ride, but it doesn't really feel like it because of how action-packed the whole layout is. It also received new lap bars for the 2024 season, as the older restraints were despised by everyone who experienced this coaster. However, I was sad to find out that the new restraints do not lock in position when you leave the station, and will keep coming down during the layout, resulting in riders being absolutely stapled due to the intense positive forces in the valley after the first drop. I tried to counteract this by sitting in a middle seat and then raising my heels off the floor of the train and pushing my thighs into the lap bar on the high G-force moments to keep it from coming down so I can still have room for the airtime hills. I found that this method actually somewhat works for me. I've also found that I don't really prefer any row on this coaster. The front honestly feels like it has stronger airtime to me personally on the hills and is a little more sustained, and the back row of course has the best experience on the first drop. Overall, this coaster is a ridiculously intense experience, but I still find that it is re-rideable and I'm always coming back for more. No matter what your opinion is on this coaster, you have to appreciate that Intamin was able to cram a hypercoaster into this plot of land and turn it into one of the best in the country. Another Intamin coaster at this park is Stormrunner, which is an accelerator coaster built in 2004. Its main feature is its hydraulic launch, which brings the train from 0 to 72 miles per hour in just 2 seconds. This makes it the 5th fastest accelerating coaster launch in the world, but with King de Ka and Formula Rosa being closed for an extended period of time as of making this video, it is currently the 3rd fastest launch. And you can definitely feel the force on this launch. It gives that awesome feeling of leaving your stomach behind on the launch track as you hurtle towards the top hat. And one other thing that I like to do on launch coasters is to close my eyes. This might sound weird, but I think it just adds a little extra thrill and confuses my brain and senses. And you don't know when you're going to hit the pull up into the top hat, so it always freaks me out a little bit. After the launch, the train ascends a 150-foot tall top hat, and if you're in the front on this element, you get great ejector airtime on the ascent, and then stay out of your seat all the way over the crest and get floater airtime all the way down. It's truly a great element and airtime moment. In the back row, you just get airtime on the way down, but it's also very strong as you get whipped down the 90-degree drop. After this, the train heads into what the park calls a Cobra loop, but is really just an oddly shaped immelman. This is a decent inversion, but nothing special. If I'm being honest, it looks cooler from all of the pathways than actually riding it. It is still a solid element, but it just feels like an average immelman. But the next inversion is much different because it is the Flying Snake Dive. This double inversion is a heartline roll combined with a dive loop and takes place high off the ground. You get airtime on the entrance, mostly in the front row, and then a crazy amount of hang time and whip on the double inversion. The train just keeps rotating and finally dives back towards the ground. This is my second favorite element on the ride behind the launch. After this, the train travels back towards the station and traverses a quick transition to the right and back to level, which gives both laterals and some airtime. Then you pop up into the brake run, which mostly gives airtime to the front few rows. The brakes on this coaster are extraordinarily high off the ground, almost like a B&M Giga brake run. In the end, this coaster has a great adrenaline rush with the launch, but the rest of the layout adds so much to the coaster, so it leaves me feeling a bit more satisfied than some of the other intimate accelerator installations out there. Not to say that Accelerator at Knott's and King Dakar at Great Adventure aren't spectacular coasters, but Stormrunner's layout offers something those coasters don't. The park's final Intamin coaster is Fahrenheit. This is basically Intamin's take on a Gerstlauer Eurofighter. It has a compact layout, a vertical lift hill, beyond vertical drop, and is packed with inversions. This is a solid supporting coaster that brings something different to Hersheypark's lineup. There isn't another one of these coasters in the world outside of China, so it gives the park something very unique. And the ride experience is solid too. The drop is a great moment of ejector airtime, and the first two inversions are floaty with intense G-forces in the valleys. I've never really liked Cobra rolls on sit-down coasters because they never really feel like they do anything, but this one is pretty good as far as the element goes. The transitions whip you around, and I like the shaping a lot more than the ones on B&M sit-down and floorless coasters. Then you haul through an intense and whippy double corkscrew, which is definitely my favorite part of the layout. Then you traverse a couple of turns and one strong moment of airtime before hitting the brakes. This layout consists of 3 sets of 2 inversions. The first 2 make up the Norwegian loop, then there's the Cobra roll, and the final 2 inversions are the double corkscrew. I can say I was expecting just a little more because so many people say it's really intense, and I didn't think it was that intense. I think I was expecting something sort of like Maverick at Cedar Point, but with a more inversion-focused layout. But maybe that was just because I rode Skyrush and Stormrunner, and those coasters are much more intense to me. However, the pacing is also top-notch for an inversion-focused coaster. This is a great coaster and fits well into the park's overall lineup. Candymonium is the newest B&M hypercoaster in the US and stands at a height of 210 feet. This ride was part of Hersheypark's biggest expansion ever, Chocolate Town. They redid the entire front entrance and made it much more efficient and better looking. But the crazy thing about Candymonium is that it's only the 4th or 5th best coaster in the entire park. In how many parks would a B&M hypercoaster be the 4th best coaster? That just shows how deep this lineup of coasters is. Even being the 4th best coaster in the park, this is still a great ride experience. You ascend the lift hill straight out of the station, and if you ride this in the afternoon, you will be staring straight into the sun, so you can barely see anything. Although if you look behind you, you get great views of Skyrush and the rest of the park. Then you plummet down the 216-foot drop that feels like it lasts forever, or at least much longer than a 200-foot drop feels on other coasters. B&M has really mastered the art of getting their first drops to just feel like you're free-falling through the air on their modern Hyper and Giga coasters. Right after this drop, you fly up the best moment of the ride, this being a massive airtime hill. I would most closely compare this Camelback to the ones on Mako at SeaWorld Orlando and Diamondback at Kings Island, and the best part is how sustained it is. You are out of your seat for probably 5 seconds and it feels like you're never going to come down. Then you fly through a standard B&M Hyper turnaround and begin the return run, which includes multiple airtime hills and 2 helices. The first airtime hill is trimmed quite hard, but even so it delivers sustained floater airtime. Then you turn right into a 360-degree helix that leads straight into an outer banked airtime drop. I wouldn't call it a hill because you never really rise up into it. Either way, this is probably one of the better elements on the ride, and it is easily the most unique as we've never really seen one of these on a B&M coaster. You just kind of dangle to the side while experiencing a little bit of airtime. However, I wish the train would take this element with a little more speed, which would probably be possible if the trim on the previous hill didn't hit so hard. As a result, it's definitely a front row element for me. After this, you head through another trimmed airtime hill and speed past the Kisses Fountain. This turn around the fountain looks much cooler from the ground while watching than actually riding. While you're on the coaster, you're going too fast and too far away to even notice the fountain. Often, I forget that it's even there and don't even notice it. Then you traverse one more small airtime dip before hitting the brakes. However, this brake run is really weird. After hitting the first set of brakes, there is a turn to the right that you take at a pretty decent speed. I'm pretty sure this first set of brakes is supposed to act as a mid-course so that they can run 3 trains, but it doesn't do anything because the ops are not impressive on this ride, especially for a B&M Hyper. They were consistently hitting over 2 minutes on their dispatches, which is honestly terrible for this ride model. Even at parks with subpar operations, they are still usually hitting 1-minute dispatches on their B&M Hyper. After all my critiques and criticisms, this is still a good ride. Yes, I do think there are some things that could be better, but it is what it is. Hersheypark got what they needed with this addition, which is a massive crowd pleaser that looks fantastic over the front entrance. This lineup just continues to get deeper as they have a short but intense B&M invert with Great Bear. It has a funky and atypical layout with an even more odd first drop. After disengaging from the lift hill, you go through this small helix high off the ground before dropping down a steep, twisted drop. I've never heard anyone talk about how intense the helix is either. Even with how slow it feels like you are traveling, it still piles on some positive G's. Off-ride, it does not look impressive, but it honestly might be my second favorite part of the layout. The rest of the layout consists of a lackluster Immelman, a whippy 0G roll, a turn, a corkscrew, and another turn before the brakes. It is short and the layout kind of dies out for the last 10 seconds or so, but before that it is really intense and includes my favorite 0G roll on an invert. I also want to take a second to point out these absurd supports. For some reason, they didn't want to put footers on the pond, even though Skyrush does that exact thing. But it makes for some really funny looking supports that are just comical to look at as an enthusiast. Hats off to B&M though for making this coaster work with the demands Hersheypark must have had about where the support footers could be placed. Lightning Racer is a dueling GCI wooden coaster that has some good pops of airtime and well done interactions with the other side. But this ride never really gets a line, so you could literally just re-ride it the whole day if you wanted to. It basically made Hersheypark's first GCI, Wildcat, worthless, as Lightning Racer was bigger, faster, had more airtime, and of course had the racing aspect. It was also way smoother, which is what led to Wildcat slowly losing its popularity and eventually led to the Wildcat's Revenge we know today. The park's other wooden coaster is Comet, which is a PTC installation which opened in 1946. Hersheypark clearly takes good care of this coaster as it is quite smooth and runs very well. It also gives some airtime and other forces, more than I was expecting. In addition, the layout is fairly long with over 3,300 feet of track. To me, this is a textbook example of a great classic wooden coaster. This is where Hershey's lineup starts to finally taper off a little bit, but even the park's bottom tier of coasters is still solid. They have 3 family coasters, an indoor Mauer spinner called Laugh Track, and a mock Wild Mouse that runs too fast for its track and is honestly painful. In addition, they have a decent aero mine train called Trailblazer. Plus, they have 2 more looping coasters, including Jolly Rancher Remix, which is a Vekoma boomerang that is honestly more on the painful side than others of that model that I've ridden. They also have Super Duper Looper, which is a classic Schwarzkopf coaster with a vertical loop right after the first drop. However, Super Duper Looper is still a fun ride because it is pretty comfortable, only has lap bars, and follows the terrain around its plot in the park. The vertical loop is really the only remotely exciting element though. Overall, it's worth a ride if it's your first visit to Hersheypark. Finally, this park also has a kiddie coaster called Coco Cruiser. I of course rode it for the credit because I'm entitled and I didn't care if I made little kids wait longer to ride it. It makes 3 laps around the layout and really isn't too uncomfortable even if you're tall like me. Finally, Hersheypark also does have some large flat rides, including 3 different SNS tower rides all located right next to each other, which are 80 feet, 131 feet, and 189 feet tall respectively. The park collectively brands these 3 towers as the Hershey Triple Tower. They also have a large Ferris wheel near Wildcat's Revenge and Lightning Racer, which I would highly recommend as it offers great views of the park. Speaking of views, if you want more of those, they also have an observation tower that stands 330 feet tall, although the gondola only reaches 250 feet. This attraction is called the Kissing Tower and is located on Kissing Tower Hill in the back of the park. Finally, if you're interested in water rides, the park also has a Hopkins Shoot the Chutes ride called Tidal Force. Now as far as food goes, Hersheypark probably has some of the more famous food of any theme park. The Chocolatier is a full-fledged restaurant with many different offerings like flatbreads, burgers, ribs, and steaks. And of course, they put their own chocolate twist on some of these dishes, making for a unique experience. They also serve some of the most giant milkshakes I've ever seen. And that is definitely one of the most famous foods I've ever seen at an amusement park, as everyone talks about how crazy these things are. But this restaurant is obviously pretty expensive, and I don't know if I would recommend eating here during your full park day, as it will take up some time. However, you can still eat at the restaurant without scanning your ticket to go inside the park if you want to visit it on a day when you're not at the park. Outside of the chocolatier, you will find lots of normal theme park food such as burgers, chicken strips, and fried food, and a chain restaurant or two such as Subway. It's solid, but about what you would expect from an amusement park. Now, one of my favorite things about this park is the preview plan that comes with every ticket. This allows you to enter the park for 2 or 3 hours the night before you go to the park for a full day. And this is a perk I highly recommend making use of. The last 2 hours before the park closes is often the emptiest it will get, meaning you can get maybe even half of the credits knocked out in that time. Now here is my route that I take to avoid waiting in big lines and getting the most rides out of my visit. If you are utilizing the preview, I'd recommend getting to the gate as soon as you are allowed to. For normal ticket holders, this is 2 hours before closing time. If you are staying at an official Hersheypark hotel, you can get in 3 hours before the park closes. Now you can sort of make a decision here based on the posted wait times in the Hersheypark app, but I would recommend going first to Skyrush if it's running 2 trains. If they are running 2 trains on it, the wait will most likely be 15 minutes or less. Then I would make my way to Stormrunner if it is operating. This coaster can be a little unreliable, so if you don't want to take any chances of it being down the next day when you visit, just knock it out now if the wait is less than 45 minutes. Next, I like to get a quick ride on Wildcat's Revenge, as it will more than likely have a 10-minute wait or less. Finally, I recommend heading to Lightning Racer, as it will be a walk-on, and then ending your night on Laugh Track. That is a coaster which gets some of the most ridiculous lines in the park. So if you just hop into line right before park closing, you don't have to worry about how much time you're wasting in that line. It's fine for a family coaster, but most definitely not worth a 90-minute queue during park operating hours. Then for your complete day visit, I recommend getting to the park at least 30 minutes before it opens, if not more, because this is a park where lots of people show up early and you want to be able to park near the front, as well as be one of the first people inside the park waiting for the barriers to be moved. I really don't like their system of entry, however. They let people into the park early, but then stop anyone who doesn't have Sweet Start a certain distance down the midways. Everyone crowds right up to the barriers, and it makes everything feel so crowded. Once you enter the park, there will already be lines for some rides because of Hersheypark's early entry system, Sweet Start. Again, if you are staying at an official Hersheypark resort, you should make use of this. There's usually a limited selection of rides, so you can just do whatever your personal preference is. But if Candymonium is one of those options, definitely do that to avoid the 2-hour line it will get for most of the day. If you are just entering the park at the normal opening time, I recommend heading to Comet first because this is always a long wait no matter what time of day it is. So get one ride on this, and then I head to Skyrush and get a ride or two while the line is still decently short. After this, you could head to Super Duper Looper if the line is short, but I would recommend heading to Great Bear to get in a few laps. At this time of day, it should still be a station wait. Around this time, lines will start to inflate a little, and you will have to just suck it up and wait in some longer lines. Regardless, I like to head to Stormrunner and get in a quick lap on this before the afternoon. This coaster doesn't have great reliability and has pretty bad capacity, especially if they're only running one side of the station. So if it's a big priority, you could head here. Then get a ride on Jolly Rancher Remix before it gets too hot. This queue has absolutely no shade, so it can be a brutal wait with this coaster's poor capacity. Then keep working your way to the other side of the park, picking up a ride or two on Fahrenheit, and then heading to Wildcat's Revenge. This ride never gets too long of a wait, so you can really ride at any time of day without much of a line. Then after this, head to the front of the park and get your laps on Candymonium. At this time of day, if you're lucky, you could get up to 4 rides in half an hour. After this, you will have all of the major coasters ridden, so you can just go ahead and get some re-rides on things, or knock out some other credits like Coco Cruiser. For some reason, I've seen the line lengths in this park drop from around 3:30 to 5:30, so you can get a lot of rides in at this time. I'm not sure if it is always like this, but in my last visit, in that 2-hour time span, I got 4 rides on Candymonium, 3 on Skyrush, plus a lap on Super Duper Looper and Stormrunner, as well as the Dry Gulch Railroad and Wildcat's Revenge. I also think you could have an alternative plan in the morning where you just go from Comet to Fahrenheit and then Stormrunner and Jolly Rancher Remix. Then head to the back of the park to hit Wildcat's Revenge before returning to the front to get rides on Skyrush, Candymonium, and the rest of the coasters you want to ride. After that, you could rotate over towards Super Duper Looper and Great Bear. I think you could choose either one of these plans based on your personal preferences. Now, one complaint I do have about this park are the operations. To be honest, the only coaster in the park which was hustling coasters in and out was Wildcat's Revenge. I'm not trying to call anyone out or be negative here, but it was disappointing to see such poor operations on coasters which should have great capacity like Skyrush, only for them to stack their second train on the brake run for 2 minutes every cycle. That's basically the story on every coaster except for Wildcat's Revenge. Hopefully the park can improve their dispatches in the future. One final personal negative about this park for me is the layout and how crowded it feels. The layout feels like it was almost made at random as the park expanded, and now they're stuck with it. And with the park being so small in land area, the midways just aren't big enough to accommodate all the attendance this park gets. It just feels crowded everywhere, even if the park isn't that busy. This isn't too big of a deal, but I wish it weren't a problem. Overall, Hershey is a great amusement park with a very impressive lineup. It is a bucket list park for every coaster enthusiast, and I hope the tips we mentioned in this video are helpful for anyone who visits this park. Leave your thoughts about this park in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.